Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. It is now time for a new Necromancer build, and this one is something clearly broken. It all comes back to the Necromancer player, Cinity X, who livestreamed themselves killing Uber Lilith with a minion build about 2 weeks ago. But not just that, they somehow crunched her after just a moment of build-up in a single hit, dealing roughly 80% of her health bar. A minion build. The fight lasted a ridiculous 8 seconds before she took that pop, which then followed a wait for phase 2, where, you know, she's mostly immune, you're just waiting for the platform to drop. This is working because of a strange interaction between this unique, the Ring of Mendeln, and the skill Bone Prison, which seems to count as a minion. Basically, we're talking about a concept that's busted in terms of burst potential, but also the fact that this probably shouldn't be a thing. I'm not thinking this is intended, and I actually expect this to be removed from the game. But when will that happen? In the upcoming 1.1.1 patch? I don't think so. They've not mentioned it anywhere, so either it'll come in that or the following patch, or maybe a hotfix at some point. They did say they wouldn't do that again outside of crazy situations, so maybe not. Meaning there's a good chance this will survive in-game for a while, we can take advantage of it. Today then, I'm covering Cinity X's concept with my own take on the build. Please be sure to check out Cinity's stream though, who knows what they might discover in the future. Now let's explain what's actually happening here. So Lucky Hit triggers the Ring of Mendeln, causing a pop of damage from your minions on their next attack. Lucky Hit triggers a lot here due to our gear, which has a lot of Lucky Hit benefits, right? But largely because of Corpse Explosion. Each tick of the dot caused by the blighted Corpse Explosion version, the goop on the ground, each singular tick of that has a 60% chance to proc a Lucky Hit, which is very high. But then it's ticking a lot, so it's triggering a lot, which again we're enhancing with different methods. But then we have the Bone Prison, which is really weird. It's being treated as if it's minions. Like the hitbox of each individual wall has its own health bar, and I guess it thinks each one is a minion. And because it's a quote-unquote minion, it is triggering the explosion of the Ring of Mendeln. But the thing there is, the Bone Prison can't attack. So, you know, the skeletons have to attack for the explosion to go off. The prison, instead, because it doesn't have an attack, just pops, and it triggers a lot faster than your minions can even attack. Then on top of all of that, we know that Barber as a heart is busted, skyrocketing your damage. All you need is the one crit, and then it'll start building. When we group up enemies with tendrils, we get the crit chance to proc, of course, the actual Barber. And then if we Bone Prison those enemies, it's basically an absolute nuke. With this, I'm able to just kind of wander through my dungeons while my minions pop everything, and I drop a wall on people. With the amount my cooldown's being reset, I'm able to Bone Storm and keep that going for a long period, and also Blood Mist a lot, much like the Shadow Mist build. Look, this is just silly. Surely it's not sticking around forever. The only question is, for how long will it last? But with it all explained, let's go through the build. As always, we'll begin with the skill tree, where we begin with our basic, which is of course Reap, which we enhance and go for Acolyte's Reap, which guarantees a corpse trigger every 4 seconds when you use Reap. We also get 3 out of 3 Hued Flesh, just to generate more corpses. The more they are, the more corpse explosions, and therefore Lucky Hit. But then we come down to the tree with Corpse Explosion itself. We only take 1 level of this because the damage doesn't matter at all. It's just about the ticks of it. We'll enhance it and then get to Blighted Corpse Explosion, turns it into that shadow damage over time, which helps with the key passive, but also, like I said, each tick causes a potential Lucky Hit, and the Lucky Hit rate, as you can see, is 60% each individual tick, which is why this is crazy. Also, we're taking Blood Mist for the iframes, just 1 level, then we enhance it and go for a Ghastly Blood Mist, giving us a way to guarantee spawn corpses in a fight. This means you can recover minions easily, and of course it means trigger your corpse tendrils and corpse explosions as much as possible. While we're here, it's a minion build. Of course, we're taking Skeletal Warrior Mastery just to improve the damage output of our warriors. 5 out of 5 on Bone Prison. This enhances the actual life of the wall, but reduces the cooldown of Prison, and we want to be using this constantly, so that really helps. We will enhance it and then go for Ghastly Bone Prison, so we generate essence when we pop it down, and it also generates vulnerability. Potentially the bug with the way that we're getting this pop of damage from the Bone Prison might be tied specifically to Ghastly Bone Prison based on what people are saying, but I've been unable to really prove that. For the passives, we take 1 level in Grim Harvest. We don't care about essence in this build, but Fuel by Death, of course, improving the damage we get after we consume a corpse. We're doing a lot of that. On the next tree, we have an extra ability, Decrepify. At this point, you're going to notice we're getting a lot of abilities, and we don't have that many slots on the bar. Through different mechanics, 2 of which come from hearts, we're actually not putting some abilities on our bars, so I will explain in a moment. So we're going 1 level in Decrepify as always for the damage reduction, enhancing it and going for Abhorrent. This is what's helping with the cooldowns and potential stun tied to Lucky Hit. It curses enemies, so we take Amplified Damage to improve curse damage in general. Death's Embrace is going to give us some nice damage reduction, as well as improving our damage to close enemies. And 3 out of 3 again on Skeletal Mage Mastery to improve their damage and their life. On the next tree, tree, we have Corpse Tendrils, the all-important AoE stun pull, which we enhance and go for Plagued to again generate vulnerable. I'd love to consider Blighted Corpse Tendrils and get some survivability through Blood Orbs. Absolutely something I would be running in this build normally, but it's bugged in this current patch. They've mentioned that that is an issue, but they haven't seemed to highlight whether that will actually be fixed in 1.1.1. So for the moment, more vulnerability. Also in this area, we have more passives. One level into Reaper's Pursuit gives us a bit of nice movement speed with the Darkness skills, but most importantly, we want Gloom. When you damage enemies with Darkness skills, they take increased shadow damage from both you and your minions. Very good. On the ultimate tree, we of course take Bone Storm and enhance it with Prime and Supreme, giving us crit chance and also damage reduction, which is important, but because of an aspect, this is turning into shadow damage, which is going to work with our key passive. For the minion enhancements, we're taking Inspiring Leader 3 out of 3. This gives you and your minions attack speed when we are healthy, and since we're shielding and iframing, that's quite a lot. Death's Defense is going to prevent minions being one-shot, and at 3 out of 3, they'll only ever take 30% of the max life on a hit, which is amazing, and we want to heal them as much as possible through Bonded in essence. I'm also getting levels in Hellbent Commander passively from my amulet, but we're not spending points on that. Last though, we have our key passive, Shadowblight. A lot of our damage is going to be darkness and shadow, so we're dealing lots of damage over time through that, and aspects will enhance this effect. So of course we have Raised Skeleton on the bar, we have Bone Storm, we have Corpse Tendrils, we have the Blood Mist, we have our basic Reap, and finally we have Bone Prison, which means we're not running Decrepify and we're not running Corpse Explosion, despite them being important parts of the build. Again, in reference to the fact that we're using Sacrilegious, the heart, it's going to be triggering our Corpse Tendrils without us actually having to use them, which is great, but Corpse Explosion won't automatically trigger if it's not on the bars. The reason it's not on the bars is because we're triggering Corpse Explosion through the Explosive Mist aspect anyway. If you really wanted to force Corpse Explosion onto the bars, I would lose Reap to do so. In regards to the Book of the Dead then, we are using Warriors and Mages and sacrificing the Golems. For the Warriors, of course, you're going Reapers and giving them a chance to form a corpse. It's extremely important that we have that. Skeletal Mages, obviously Shadow, now they're actually working with upgrade 2 for every 4th attack, generating more Shadow Bolts, and that works with our key passive. For Golems, of course, it's the Iron Golem Sacrifice for the increased critical strike damage. Now it's time for the big one, which is the ridiculous amount of Paragon boards that we have. And honestly, if I had more points, let's say I was level 90 or 100, I'd probably come down to another board and just look for more glyphs, because there are so many glyphs that are incredible for this build and minion builds as a whole that it demands so many Paragon points. Let's start from the beginning on my first board, where we're going to work our way up and around to Prime and then work our way to the glyph socket, where we have Amplify. Cursed enemies take 10% times increased damage from you and your minions, which is going to scale your damage and their damage by a lot. However, if you're looking for more survivability in this build, which you probably will be if you're pushing tiers, I want to highlight the Darkness glyph, which means when you or your minions deal shadow damage to an enemy, that enemy deals reduced damage, which is another way to get damage reduction in this build. And again, if you're pushing tiers, you'll probably want something like that. That aside though, this is our first board and how we get the 40 intelligence, including preservation, coming to knowledge and leaving on the left. And then we come to our first board extension. This is of course Cult Leader, which is amazing normally, but we don't actually care about the individual damage of the minions. We just care about triggering the explosion specifically of the Ring of Medell, so it's not really worth getting since we're not running Golem as well. But this works as a great way to get a quick glyph, and it has some very important rare nodes that we need to talk about. So entering this board, we come around to the right and make sure we go to our glyph socket, but on the way we'll activate Custody. 20% damage reduction for your minions is massive, and we can further get more with magic nodes around that, which is very important. In the glyph socket, we're of course going Exploit to improve our vulnerable damage, which benefits from getting Dexterity. Again, a board that is great for this because it has the +7 Dexterity nodes on magic nodes. We're also coming to Overlord to improve minion damage individually, and there are magic nodes to further improve that. We come up to the left and also pick up Puppeteer for more minion damage and minion attack speed, which is a nice perk. From there, we're going to move away from that board and to the right to come to our next board, Flesh Eater. Since we are consuming corpses a good amount and massively triggering big explosions right after we do so, it just works really well to get this big benefit. I rotate the board to get to the glyph first though, because those are very important. We come from the left and head down and straight to the actual glyph socket, where we have Territorial. This socket is good for Dex, min-maxing your way to 25 quickly. This is going to give us damage reduction against close enemies, and again, this is going to be a very important aspect of the build. How hard are you pushing tiers? How much damage reduction do you need? If you're just doing your own level, you can even even drop Territorial and go for something better for damage, like Essence. But anyway, I activate this and also pick up Targeted while we're here, and leave the glyph down to the bottom and to the right, and come up to Flesh Eater to make sure to pick that up. I'd also like to highlight that Stifle here and the magic nodes around it are good for crit strike damage and injured enemies, and I would pick these up if I had the points to spare, and potentially even leave the board here for another glyph socket potentially. Anyway, we're going to leave this board and head straight down to our next board, which is obviously Scent of Death, another damage reduction option. With at least 2 corpses nearby, which will be often, you'll gain a big boost to your damage reduction of 15%. Heading down from the top, we head to the right to go pick up Corrective for a bit of extra crit strike damage, picking up the crit strike damage magic nodes and ignoring the potion healing ones. We will head down and to the right and come down to the node of Scent of Death. While we're here, we can also come up to the right and just pick up Shadow Resilience just for its bonus perk of 4% extra max life. There's magic nodes around that for more max life that you should get if you have the points. Anyway, we'll come down and to the left and pick up the Glyph socket, which will be Control, a major damage increase for our slowing and stunning, which we're doing both of constantly in this build. We can also pick up 2 nodes here, the rare nodes of Deathmarked and also Preservation, which has armor nodes around it, which are very nice for damage reduction. Again, we want lots of that. But when we're finished, we will actually leave just under Shadow Resilience and to the right to efficiently get to the next board, which is the Wither board. Also a great legendary node, but not necessarily important to this build because, again, all we care about is that explosion from specifically the Ring of Mendel. So we effectively rotate this board to get to the glyph socket as fast as possible, heading straight down and to the right to pick up Scourge. Very important. Again, you and your minions deal 10% times increased damage to enemies affected by shadow damage over time, so our key passive, enhancing the damage of our explosions even more. It only requires 25 willpower, so on this board it's actually easy to activate without even being level 15, which is a nice perk. Also, make sure you pick up Malediction for the extra shadow damage, and if you have more points than me, you can leave to the right to go pick up Gnawing Darkness for more damage over time with shadow damage, and there's magic nodes around that further improves that. From here, if you have more points, again, I believe I would come to Stifle, pick up those nodes, and head to the gate here to open up another glyph socket, probably with Hulkling Monstrosity, just to get myself efficiently to another glyph socket. Time to talk gear. Let's begin with the hearts. So we have a Wrathful, a Brutal, and a Vicious heart. The Wrathful, as you should know at this point, is Barber, a no-brainer, perfect synergy with this concept, and absolutely ridiculous. For Vicious, again, another no-brainer, it's Sacrilegious, causing the automatic triggering of corpse skills, such as Tendrils and Corpse Explosions. Though the skills have to be on your bar, so I'm only triggering Corpse Tendrils with my setup. Again, if you want to put Corpse Explosion on your bars, so it's triggering more often, I can understand why, but you'll have to lose Reap, which is a guaranteed corpse trigger, which can be very important, especially if you die. The last heart then is the Brutal Heart for Decrepify, triggering the Decrepify aura around you automatically. And as you can see, it can roll ridiculously low. When there are 0 enemies near you, you gain the aura of Decrepify. So you permanently have Decrepify. Whether it says 10 seconds or longer or whatever, it's just permanent. If there's any time you're remotely in a combat area, you just have Decrepify. This allows us to save a skill slot on our bar though, and is very important to the build. Now let's go through the gear, starting from the helmet. We have, of course, on a helmet, the increase to Skeletal Warriors. On the chest piece, we have Explosive Mist. This is what's helping us reset the cooldown of Blood Mist when we actually detonate corpses, but is also vital for the fact that it lets Blood Mist trigger corpses. So we Blood Mist and get down some guaranteed corpse explosions on the targets we want to hit. On the gloves, we have our offensive slot, Osseous Gale, newly buffed. It is 10 seconds increased now on the Bone Storm, keeping it alive even longer, and it even consumes 8 corpses. An important aspect is that corpses are being consumed, so yeah, that helps. On the legs, of course, it's Disobedience for the damage reduction that provides, and on the boots, it's the aspect to increase our Skeletal Mage's count, which is the most important one. On our main hand, our one hand, it is a wand, which is very important because it has a lucky hit chance on it. We'll explain that in a moment, but it's of course blighted. You deal 120% times increased damage for 6 seconds after the Shadowblight key passive damages enemies 10 times. So regularly you're just getting this ridiculous spike in your damage, and also really helping the explosive damage. On the offhand, it is a focus, but it's the decay aspect. Each time the Shadowblight key passive deals damage to enemies, it increases the next Shadowblight's damage within 10 seconds by up to 40% times, and that stacks up to 5 times, which can get absolutely crazy the longer a fight goes on. On the amulet though, it is of course the Grasping Veins aspect, giving us the most crit chance possible after we get a Corpse Tendril trigger, but also those hit by the Corpse Tendril take up to 60% times bonus critical strike strike damage, which is obviously ludicrous. It is the biggest damage spike you can have, and so going on your amulet makes sense. Of course, we're running the Ring of Mendeln. That's obviously vital and key to this build. And lastly, the other ring is the ultimate shadow, which is how we're turning Bone Storm into shadow damage. So why no Shielding Storm in a build that generates darkness with Bone Storm? We'll use Bone Storm a lot because of cooldown reduction. It's just more survivability, right? Well, weirdly, it doesn't interact properly with Barber, which might be a bug, but we can't really complain about bugs when this entire build is benefiting from what I believe is a bug. Still, it generates a shield. It is good with Shielding Storm, even if it's not working properly when Barber's triggering, and is certainly worth using. It's just you have to give up the extra perk of, say, more skeletal warriors, which means less explosive damage from Mendeln in that way. But you will be more survivable, and if you're pushing tiers, that might be worth doing. When it comes to the actual stats you want on your gear now, you're looking for number one priority, lucky hit chance, closely followed by cooldown reduction. I have lucky hit chance on everything I can get. For example, we now can get lucky hit chance while you have a barrier, such as on your helmet. You can even find it on your amulet. I think you might even be able to find it on focuses. So that's going to be really important. You're looking for a lucky hit on every piece that can get it, which means gloves, rings, amulet, helm, and your focus, your offhand. So get as much lucky hit as you can, because that's what's going to really help trigger more and more Ring of Mendeln explosions, which is how you're dealing damage in this build. Cooldown reduction is really important because it's going to mean you're able to Blood Mist more and Bone Prison more, which is the nuke, and also Bone Storm more, which keeps you alive. After that, it's going to be standard stuff, crit strike chance, improving your crit damage, and vulnerable damage increases. And then for defensives, it's the standard stuff of max life, damage reduction, total armor, then followed by damage reduction from distant and close enemies. You can also benefit from the damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time in this build. You don't need to worry about what's on your gloves in terms of a skill increase because we aren't using a core skill, but I would recommend on your amulet you have a major damage increase passive. Hellbent Commander is obviously a great one, but I would also recommend Gloom as another alternative. As mentioned, you want to be running a wand because this comes with inherent lucky hit chance, and you want to use a focus because that comes with inherent cooldown reduction, the two main things we want in this build. In terms of gems though, you can see that I'm running rubies just to give myself more damage to survive, improving our max life on our armor. And then on the weapons, as always, we're running the critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, which is pretty much every build ever. Alright, so how do you play this ridiculous build then? It's super simple. Thanks to the Sacrilegious Heart, we barely have to worry about anything. You just make sure you pop a summon every now and then to pull out the priest that will buff your allies and heal them. And you might corpse tendril intentionally if you want to stack up specific mobs in a special or specific way. But mostly the fights are you just running to the enemies and aggressively blood misting into them to generate corpses, corpse explosions, and pull them with a corpse tendril. As soon as they're grouped up, you can slam them with a bone prison, which will absolutely destroy them. Now, thanks to the amount of lucky hit we have in the build and all the resetting of Decrepify, you should be bone storming and bone prisoning a lot and be next to always immune from damage because of Blood Mist having no cooldown as you're fighting. Just be careful that you don't go too ahead of your minions because obviously they're important and will reduce damage by being more targets for your enemies to attack. Pretty much the only thing you have to worry about is being one shot, so if you avoid that, you're good. This is why again I referenced the way that you can change your aspects and your Paragon slightly to be more damage reduction focused, since that's the only threat in this build. If you are pushing tiers though, play slower, play around your Bone Storm and Blood Mist, making sure they're always available as you enter every fight. That way you'll be next to immune to damage and should survive most scenarios. But yeah, in conclusion, basically change the build to your preferences. Are you going really hard on a speed clear? Maybe the enemies are 5 or 10 levels above you. Well then committing everything to damage and speed is no problem at all. But as I've been saying, I would advise going even harder on defensive glyphs in your Paragon and working in Shielding Storm, probably on the helmet slot to lose the extra warriors if you want more survivability through that. You can even put the disobedience aspect onto your amulet, making sure you get grasping veins somewhere else when we make that trade. If you want to go full defensive, meaning you're going for like a tier 100 push, which is very viable in this build. In essence, this build is busted, and I genuinely believe it is not meant to work this way. Bone Prison shouldn't be doing this. Again, I don't know how long this state of ridiculous build is going to last, but since it's super strong, we can benefit and have a lot of fun with it in the meantime. And I honestly think it's going to survive the 1.1.1 patch, and it's just a question of are they going to hotfix it after they said they won't do crazy hotfix changes anymore. I think there's a good chance that this build survives till 1.1.2, whenever that is, so we can make the most use of it. Once again, shout out and congratulations to Cinity X for coming up with this concept. Full credit to them. Be sure to check out their stream. Until next time though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.